You stand beneath the marble arches of Rome as twilight bleeds into firelight. The air hums with the murmur of men bargaining, the jingle of coins, the soft sound of sandals scuffing stone. The smell is not victory or incense, but sweat, human and afraid. You realize too late this is not a temple. It is a market, and you are not a spectator. You are the product. Before we step fully into this lost world, a world gilded in marble but built on human suffering, take a moment to support the channel. If you value deep dives into history's hidden corners, where power, cruelty, and beauty collide, consider liking this video and subscribing. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? It's astonishing that across thousands of miles, from different nations and tongues, we gather here, bound by curiosity about the ghosts of the past. Main narration. Third person begins. The Roman slave market was the empire's most public secret. Everyone knew it existed, yet few wished to speak of what it traded most efficiently: bodies made desirable through defeat. On certain mornings near the Tiber, the crowd gathered early. Vendors set up awnings to shield the merchandise from the sun. Bronze bells clanged as the day's offerings were paraded forward. Men and boys stripped bare beneath the marble gaze of the city's gods. Roman law made it clear: a slave was property, not person. But here, amid the flicker of oil lamps and the shuffle of parchment contracts, the transaction was not just economic, it was erotic. Buyers did not come merely for labor. They came for possession. A historian named Petronius once wrote of boys pale as ivory, their voices unbroken, their eyes cast low. These were not farmhands or miners, but companions to decorate a household. Greece had been conquered, yet its beauty had become Rome's obsession. Young Greeks were prized for refinement, Syrians for delicacy, Thracians for their feral strength. In the words of one Roman noble, recorded by Seneca, "Some are fit to carry a sword, others to carry a smile." At the center of the market, an auctioneer raised his staff and shouted names like incantations. Andronikos, age 15, trained in reading, fair of face. The bidding began. Fast, dispassionate, merciless. Coins clinked, gestures were made, and another soul was absorbed into the machinery of empire. The noise was relentless. Laughter, arguments, the low hum of appraisal. Buyers pressed close, inspecting teeth, shoulders, the smoothness of skin. A scratch could lower value. A scar meant defiance. One record from the jurist Ulpian describes buyers demanding proof of purity, a phrase that masked the unspeakable. For the enslaved, the ritual of sale was a psychological execution. Once taken from their homeland, they were stripped not only of clothing but of name and past. Many were tattooed with small marks, stigmata servorum, identifying their owner or origin. Those who resisted were displayed longer, shamed publicly until compliance dulled their spirit. Even the setting conspired against them. Archaeological studies of slave markets in Delos and Rome reveal raised platforms, small stages where light hit the body just so, exaggerating muscle and symmetry. The architecture itself was designed to transform human beings into art for consumption. The Roman elite saw this as refinement, not cruelty. They argued that beauty was a gift of the gods and therefore theirs to own. A senator might purchase a boy for his household the way he bought a marble bust, both symbols of taste and status. To the Roman mind, the line between aesthetic admiration and domination was invisible. Yet beneath the marble polish of civilization, horror persisted in silence. Contemporary moralists like Seneca and Musonius Rufus condemned the practice in whispers, warning that indulgence bred decay. "He who commands another's body forgets his own soul," Seneca wrote, a rare voice of unease in a city that celebrated control. The trade did not end with the market. Once purchased, these young men were escorted through Rome's crowded streets, veiled to conceal their identities or naked to flaunt their master's wealth. Passers-by turned away or watched with idle curiosity. A transaction had been made. Its consequences belonged to private walls. Inside those walls, the line between servitude and concubinage blurred completely. Roman law had no word for consent, only ownership. A male concubine was technically a domestic slave, yet his duties reached far beyond service. The household expected him to please, to listen, to submit. In the master's mind, he was not abused, but kept. In the concubine's silence, Rome found the reflection it preferred: beauty without defiance. The historian Cassius Dio once hinted at this unspoken system when he described Emperor Nero's court, where young slaves were gilded as brides for imperial amusement. Their stories survive only in fragments, filtered through satire and rumor. But every jest about a favorite boy carried a grave truth that Rome's grandeur was built not only by conquest abroad but by subjugation within. Imagine the moment the market emptied. Torches burned low. The marble steps, once alive with bidding, gleamed with spilled oil. The smell of sweat lingered. A few coins rolled in the dust, unclaimed. The silence after the crowd dispersed was its own kind of cruelty. The hush after lives had been rewritten. Some of those taken that day would never see sunlight again. Others would rise within households, dressed in silk, fluent in poetry, gilded servants mistaken for companions. But beneath every smile lay the same hollow truth. They had been chosen, not free. Rome would call itself eternal, its empire divine. Yet for those who stood naked beneath its marble grandeur, eternity meant only endurance. The markets would open again the next morning, as if nothing had happened. The torches would be relit, the marble would shine, and the silent auction, that grotesque theater of power and beauty, would begin anew. The sun crept across the painted ceiling, gilding the room in honeyed light. The scent of crushed myrtle drifted from a bronze bowl, masking the faint odor of wax and sweat. A servant stirred before dawn, not a laborer bound for the fields, but a possession waking inside a palace. The rustle of silk marked the beginning of his day, a day that belonged entirely to someone else. Within the Roman domus, silence was a language of survival. Every sound, every glance carried meaning. The walls themselves seemed to listen, frescoes of gods and lovers frozen mid-embrace, watching as life imitated art in darker ways. The male concubine existed here as both ornament and prisoner, clothed in beauty that was never his own. The historian Pliny once described Roman villas as theaters of elegance, where even the air smelled of luxury. But behind the perfume lay hierarchy as rigid as any legion formation. The master reclined at his lectus, dictating letters or indulging in politics, while slaves glided through corridors like shadows. Among them one might stand apart, younger, more refined, trained to anticipate gestures before they were made. He was the pure delicatus, the delicate boy. His life was a paradox of privilege and peril. He dined near his master, learned to quote Virgil, to play the lyre softly during evening banquets, to smile at guests with eyes lowered. His voice, kept high and unbroken, was prized for its sweetness. Yet every privilege was a reminder of captivity. Even laughter, when permitted, belonged to someone else's command. Roman poets often disguised these relationships in verse. Martial joked of the boy who pours wine too slowly, while Juvenal, more scathing, called such indulgence the disease of empire. Between their lines lies the truth. These young men were expected to be graceful companions and silent participants in the desires of power. They were praised in public, yet never free to speak of what occurred behind marble walls. In the intimacy of the cubiculum, the private room, the master's authority was absolute. The law recognized no distinction between affection and coercion. Roman jurists, ever meticulous, debated how to record such relationships. Was the concubine property or partner? The answer was both, a contradiction only Rome could sustain. A man might cherish his concubine, gift him rings or fine robes, and yet, in the eyes of the law, that same man could sell him the next day without explanation. Letters from the philosopher Seneca reveal a disturbing moral elasticity. He advised restraint, not mercy. "Possess," he wrote, "but do not be possessed by your possessions." The concubine, reading those words over his master's shoulder, might have felt the chill of irony. He was both possession and person, educated enough to understand his bondage, powerless to escape it. Daily life followed a rhythm designed to erase the self. Morning began with grooming, the application of scented oils, the arranging of hair in the Greek style. The concubine's reflection, framed by bronze mirrors, was a mask crafted to please. After breakfast, he might read aloud to his master, recite poetry, or accompany him to the baths. There, in the mist and murmurs, he walked a dangerous line between visibility and invisibility. To catch another man's gaze too boldly was to risk punishment. To appear disinterested was to invite jealousy. Psychological control was as constant as physical confinement. Masters employed alternating cruelty and kindness, ensuring dependency. One day, a jewel might be gifted, the next, a public slap for imagined insolence. The concubine learned to read moods like omens, the tightening of a jaw, the pause before a word, each gesture signaling what must be endured. In one surviving letter, a Roman matron complains of her husband's Greek favorite, whom she describes as obedient, beautiful, and dead in the eyes. Her disgust was not for the man's suffering, but for the shame it brought to her household. This passing remark, buried in domestic correspondence, may be one of the few honest glimpses of these invisible lives. Evenings were performances. Lanterns flickered across mosaic floors as guests reclined with wine, laughter echoing off marble columns. The concubine played music, poured drinks, whispered verses, always near, never equal. When conversation turned coarse, he became a symbol, proof of wealth and control. To be displayed was to exist. To displease was to vanish. And yet, fragments of tenderness appear in unlikely places. A faded graffito found in Pompeii reads, "He kissed me as though I were free." Whether written by a concubine or a dreamer, the words reveal something universal, the ache for agency, the fleeting illusion of mutual affection. But illusions, like empires, crack with time. As the night waned and guests departed, silence returned to the villa. The concubine gathered cups, folded linens, extinguished lamps. In the darkened corridors his footsteps echoed faintly, the only proof he lived. Somewhere behind him, the master slept peacefully, certain that possession was permanence. Outside, the city stirred, distant wheels over stone, a dog barking in an alley, the world continuing unaware. Inside, one life remained suspended, gilded and unseen. For all its grandeur, Rome could never reconcile its love of beauty with its appetite for control. The villa, adorned with art and laughter, was a cage draped in gold, and within it, the most exquisite ornament was human. As dawn approached once more, the first light touched the frescoed walls, lovers painted in eternal embrace. Beneath their gaze, another day began. The rustle of silk returned, soft as breath, signaling that the master's will had awakened, and so must his slave. The house stood silent, magnificent, and alive with invisible suffering. Centuries passed, and the marble that once reflected the faces of the conquered began to crack. The laughter of banquets had long faded. The villas stood in ruin, open to wind and rain. Yet somewhere between the broken columns and the fragments of mosaic, an absence lingered. The silence of those whose names were never carved in stone. The empire they served outlasted their voices, but not the echo of what was done to them. History, as Rome wrote it, was a history of victors. The defeated, the enslaved, the used, they survived only as shadows in the texts of their masters. The male concubine, the pure delicatus, disappeared between satire and sermon. His existence persisted not through memory, but through the anxiety he left behind. In the first centuries after Rome's height, moral panic began to creep into its literature. Philosophers warned that luxury had made men soft, that the empire had been undone not by enemies, but by desire. Juvenal sneered about the effeminacy of youth, and Tacitus lamented that Roman men no longer conquered nations, but themselves. Behind these laments lay fear, the fear that power had become decadent, that dominance had blurred into dependence. The figure of the concubine haunted these writings like a ghost, present yet forbidden to speak. Even in art he was invisible. Mosaics showed masters reclining, courtesans smiling, gods in eternal embrace, but the male attendant, the silent companion at the edge of the scene, was never named. He poured wine in fresco after fresco, his anonymity immortalized. As Christianity spread across the empire, the moral language shifted, but the erasure remained. What had once been called indulgence became sin. The concubine, once an object of envy or mockery, was recast as a symbol of moral corruption. Early church fathers like Augustine and Jerome spoke of Rome's shameful excess, where men were enthralled by their own slaves, yet they never questioned the cruelty beneath it, only the lust. In condemning the acts, they preserved the silence of the victims. For some, faith became both refuge and escape. In the catacombs beneath Rome, inscriptions plead for mercy not from masters, but from God. One faded epitaph reads simply, Servus Dei, servant of God. No name, no lineage. Perhaps it marked a man who had once been a servant of another, now reclaiming the only title left to him. By the 4th century, the empire itself had begun to fracture. Law codes grew harsher, seeking to preserve order through control. Emperor Constantine's successors issued edicts forbidding shameful relations between men, criminalizing what had once been practiced in private among the elite. The paradox was complete. Those once prized as living ornaments were now condemned as evidence of Rome's decay. The masters who had owned them were recast as sinners, the concubines as stains on divine order. The empire's obsession with purity outlived the empire itself. Yet the legacy of power left its mark in unexpected places. The Christian monasteries that rose on the ruins of the old villas inherited Rome's hierarchies of obedience, bodies subject to rules, voices silenced for devotion. The architecture of discipline remained the same, even when its purpose changed. In the dim candlelight of cloisters, prayers replaced orders, but the echo of servitude lingered. 1,000 years later, Renaissance scholars would resurrect Rome's grandeur, copying its statues and praising its poets, while ignoring the cruelty beneath the marble. They called it civilization. They called it progress. But beneath the admiration was the same blindness, the belief that beauty excused brutality. Even today, the artifacts tell a quiet story. Archaeologists uncover fragments of bracelets too small for a soldier, rings inscribed with names that never appear in census rolls, a delicate silver comb found in a villa near Pompeii, etched with the word dulcis, sweet one. Was it a gift, a token of affection, or a reminder of ownership? The line between tenderness and tyranny remains blurred, just as it was 2,000 years ago. The male concubine's afterlife is one of distortion. Where his body once symbolized pleasure, his memory became a vessel for shame. He exists in history only as a warning, a moral to others, not a man, but silence itself can bear witness. The absence in records, the erasures in sculpture, the awkward jokes in Roman verse, they reveal a truth that Rome tried to bury, that beneath its architecture of power lay generations of unacknowledged suffering. Every empire leaves such ghosts, The names may change, the systems evolve, but the pattern endures. The powerful adorn themselves with the powerless and call it culture. The concubines of Rome may be forgotten, but their story repeats wherever domination is disguised as affection, wherever control is mistaken for civilization. In the end, the ruins of Rome do not just speak of conquest and glory. They whisper of all that was lost in the pursuit of perfection, of the bodies that bore its weight, the hearts that endured its silence. Walk through the Forum today and you might hear it, the faint echo between broken pillars, a sound not of triumph but of endurance. Their names are gone, but their absence is a presence still. It lingers in the marble dust, in the cracked lips of statues, in the uneasy admiration we feel for a world that mastered everything but mercy. And if you listen closely, past the roar of history and the chorus of empire, you might hear it. A breath, a whisper, the quiet resilience of those who lived unseen. The silence is not empty. It remembers.